Joel is not a hero, and he was never meant to be one. He doesn't exist to offer comfort or moral clarity. He exists to show what happens when life breaks early and never fully repairs itself. From the moment loss enters his life, everything that follows is shaped by absence. He doesn't move forward because he believes in a better world. He moves forward because stopping would mean collapsing under the weight of what he's already lost. For a long time, I believed life rewarded effort with clarity, that if you were patient enough, careful enough, honest enough, the right answer would eventually reveal itself. I thought confusion was a sign that I hadn't thought deeply enough yet, that doubt meant immaturity. But that belief didn't survive experience. Life doesn't guide you toward clean decisions. It throws you into moments where preparation becomes irrelevant and values collide instead of aligning. Joel's world makes that obvious in the harshest way. Loss arrives without warning, and once it does, the person you were before no longer gets a vote. That's something adulthood teaches slowly and painfully. Morality isn't always about choosing what's right, but about choosing what you're willing to carry afterward. Joel doesn't get the luxury of abstract ethics. He learns early that survival reshapes values, whether you agree with it or not. I felt this in quieter ways. Moments where I assumed I would have time to become wiser, time to grow stronger, time to prepare emotionally before life demanded something from me. But life doesn't wait for internal development. Sometimes the decision comes first, and whatever growth follows is shaped by necessity, not intention. We're taught that morality is about choosing the right thing, but adulthood introduces a harder truth. Sometimes morality is about choosing what you can live with once everything is over and the noise fades. Joel doesn't become hardened because he wants to. He becomes hardened because softness becomes dangerous in a world that doesn't protect it. That change isn't heroic, it's adaptive. We don't choose clean lives, we don't choose perfect circumstances or morally comfortable paths. We choose how we move through situations that are already broken, and the question stops being, what is the right thing to do, and becomes, who will I be after this? Once you accept that life doesn't owe you clarity, something shifts. You stop waiting for certainty. You act with responsibility instead. And maybe that's the first real step toward maturity. There are moments in life that don't feel important while they're happening. They don't announce themselves as turning points. There's no music, no dramatic pause, no clear sense that everything is about to change. And yet, once they pass, you realize that entire versions of your future quietly disappeared in that instant. Joel's decision at the hospital is often discussed as if it were a moral debate, as if it were a question that could be answered cleanly if you just thought hard enough. But it wasn't a question, it was a moment. A moment where time collapsed, options narrowed, and hesitation meant loss. He didn't act with certainty. He acted because not acting was unbearable. I think we misunderstand irreversible decisions because we imagine them as confident acts. We like to believe that when the stakes are high, clarity arrives. But in reality, clarity is usually absent when it matters most. What exists instead is pressure, emotional, physical, existential. Joel doesn't choose knowing he's right. He chooses knowing he can't lose her. I've had moments like that, though quieter and less dramatic. Decisions where I knew that whatever I chose would close doors permanently. Not because I wanted to commit, but because life demanded commitment. And afterward, what stayed with me wasn't regret exactly. It was the awareness that some lives are only available to you if you abandon others. That's the real weight of an irreversible choice. It doesn't just change what happens next. It erases alternative versions of you, futures where you stayed softer, kinder, less marked. You don't get to mourn those versions properly because they never fully existed, but you feel their absence anyway. Joel lives with that absence, not as constant doubt, but as a quiet gravity that shapes his presence. He doesn't replay the moment endlessly, asking what should have happened. He knows exactly what he did. The weight comes from knowing that no amount of reflection will reopen those closed paths. And maybe that's why irreversible decisions age us. Not because they make us wiser, but because they force us to accept limitation. You stop believing you can always change course. You stop imagining infinite possibilities. You begin to live inside the consequences of a single moment. Joel doesn't collapse under that weight. He carries it. Not because he's strong, but because there's no alternative. And life eventually asks the same of us. It removes the option to remain undecided. It demands that we stand somewhere, even if the ground feels unstable. That's when you learn that responsibility isn't about being right. It's about staying present after the choice has already been made. After certain choices, the world expects explanations. People want reasons, context, justification, not because it will change anything, but because it makes the outcome easier to digest. We live in a culture that believes truth must always be spoken, that silence is a form of guilt. But Joel shows us something more uncomfortable. Sometimes silence is the most honest response available. Joel doesn't explain what he did. He doesn't defend himself, and he doesn't try to control how others see him. That absence of explanation isn't weakness, it's restraint. He understands that words would only reduce something irreversible into something manageable, and some things shouldn't be manageable, they should remain heavy. I've learned this the hard way. There were moments in my life where explaining myself felt less like honesty and more like negotiation, like I was trying to reshape the past by choosing the right words. But no explanation can undo what already happened. At some point, speaking becomes a way of avoiding responsibility rather than embracing it. Silence forces you to live with the full weight of your actions. There's no narrative to hide behind, no version of the story where you come out clean. Joel accepts that. He lets his choice exist without packaging it into something easier to forgive, and in doing so, he protects the truth from being diluted. There's also a quiet cost to silence. It isolates you. When you don't explain yourself, you accept being misunderstood. You accept judgment without correction. That takes a particular kind of courage, not the courage to speak, but the courage to remain still while others project meaning onto you. Joel lives inside that misunderstanding. He doesn't correct it. He doesn't chase validation. He understands that being at peace with yourself sometimes means letting the world hold a version of you that isn't flattering. And maybe that's one of the hardest lessons of adulthood, learning that not every truth needs an audience. Some truths are meant to be carried, not shared. Not because they're shameful, but because their weight deserves respect. Silence, in that sense, isn't absence. It's presence without performance. We grow up imagining ourselves as stable characters. We believe there is a core version of us that remains intact no matter what happens. But certain experiences don't just change your circumstances. They change the shape of who you are. After Joel's choice, he doesn't simply return to life. He has to learn how to exist as someone new. What's unsettling is that this change isn't dramatic. There's no clear moment where Joel realizes he's different. It shows in subtler ways, in how guarded he becomes, in how carefully he speaks, and how much less he expects from the world. Identity shifts quietly through behavior, not declarations. I've noticed the same thing in myself. There were moments I thought were temporary disruptions, things I would eventually get over, but instead of passing, they stayed. And slowly, they reorganized how I relate to people, to trust, to risk. I didn't plan to become more cautious or more distant at times. It just happened as a form of self-preservation. We often talk about growth as becoming more open, more confident, more evolved, but some forms of growth are subtractive. They remove illusions. They take away softness that can't survive repeated impact. Joel doesn't become less human. He becomes more aware of what being human actually costs. The hardest part of this kind of transformation is acceptance. Not fighting to return to who you were, but recognizing that person belonged to a different life. Joel doesn't chase his old self. He adapts. And adaptation isn't betrayal. It's continuity. At some point, you realize that identity isn't something you protect from damage. It's something that reshapes itself so you can keep going. Becoming someone you didn't plan to be isn't a failure of character. It's evidence that you survived something that changed you. And survival, in its quiet form, deserves more respect than we give it. We like to believe that love improves us, that it makes our choices cleaner, kinder, more ethical. We build stories where love is the proof that someone is good. But Joel's love for Ellie refuses to fit into that narrative. It doesn't purify him, it complicates him. And that discomfort is the point. Joel doesn't love Ellie in a way that aligns with moral ideals. He loves her in a way that narrows his world until she becomes the center of it. And once that happens, abstract values lose their power. The future of humanity becomes distant when compared to the immediate presence of someone you cannot bear to lose. This is difficult to admit, but I've learned that love doesn't always make us wiser. Sometimes it makes us more decisive, more willing to accept consequences we would otherwise reject. Love rearranges priorities without asking whether the new order is fair or reasonable. We like to judge Joel as if love should have made him choose differently, but that assumes love is neutral, that it doesn't demand partiality. Real love is selective. It chooses one life over another, one future over many, and that selection is where its danger lies. I've seen this in my own life. Moments where love didn't lead me to the most admirable choice, but to the most unbearable one to avoid. Where losing someone felt worse than living with the cost of protecting them. And the unsettling part wasn't the choice itself, but the realization that I would probably make it again. Joel's love doesn't seek approval. It doesn't try to justify itself through reason. It simply exists, heavy and uncompromising. And maybe that's what makes it honest. Love isn't here to make us virtuous. It's here to make life survivable when everything else collapses. That doesn't make it innocent, but it makes it real. We're taught to believe that pain has an endpoint, that if we endure long enough, something will eventually resolve. An apology, forgiveness, understanding, peace. We look for moments of closure because they promise relief. But Joel's story offers no such moment. And in that absence, it becomes painfully honest. After everything he's done, nothing settles neatly. There's no emotional release, no confession that cleans the past, no redemption arc that balances the scale. What remains is continuation, day after day. Life doesn't pause to process what happened. It moves forward, and you either move with it or get left behind. I've learned that this is one of the hardest realities to accept. Some experiences don't end. They stabilize. They become part of the background noise of your life, not loud enough to dominate every thought, but never quiet enough to disappear. Joel doesn't heal in the way we like to imagine healing. He adapts, he builds routines, he creates structure so that memory doesn't swallow him whole. Living without closure requires discipline. It means knowing when to stop revisiting the past, not because it doesn't matter, but because constant reopening prevents you from living at all. Joel learns to carry his past in a way that allows him to function, not to forget, but to continue responsibly. There's something humbling about that. It removes the fantasy that suffering automatically leads to wisdom or peace. Sometimes it only leads to endurance, and endurance isn't glamorous. It doesn't feel meaningful while you're doing it, but it's what keeps life intact. Joel doesn't move on because he feels forgiven. He moves on because staying still would turn memory into decay. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Closure isn't something life owes us. It's something we learn to live without. Taking the blame is one of the most misunderstood acts of maturity. We often confuse it with self-punishment, as if accepting responsibility meant destroying ourselves in the process. But that's not what Joel shows us. He doesn't collapse under guilt, and he doesn't attempt to cleanse himself through suffering. He does something quieter and much harder. He owns what he did without rewriting it. Joel never tries to turn his choice into something noble. He doesn't frame himself as a necessary evil or a tragic savior. He allows the decision to remain heavy, unresolved, and morally uncomfortable, because the moment you try to lighten it, you're no longer being honest. You're negotiating with the past. Taking the blame ends that negotiation. It closes the endless internal debate about what should have happened. You stop asking whether you were right or wrong and start asking how you're going to live now that the choice exists. Joel doesn't look for forgiveness because forgiveness wouldn't undo anything. What he looks for is stability. a way to move forward without repeating the same kind of harm blindly. I've learned that blame, when fully accepted, can be grounding. It anchors you in reality. It prevents you from drifting into denial or performance. The moment I stopped explaining myself, even to myself, and simply accepted that I had crossed a line, something changed. Not relief, not peace, but clarity. Moving on doesn't mean becoming lighter. It means becoming steadier. You don't forget what you did. You integrate it. You let it inform your future choices without letting it define your entire identity. Joel carries his past the same way he carries everything else, carefully, aware of its weight, unwilling to drop it onto someone else. Some choices stay with you forever, not as punishment, but as orientation. They teach you where your limits are, what you're capable of, what you need to protect yourself and others from becoming again. Taking the blame is not about staying in the past, it's about refusing to lie about it. And moving on isn't about absolution, it's about responsibility. You acknowledge the damage, you accept the weight, you live forward anyway. Take the blame, and move on.